How is everybody doing today? Um, my name is John Anderson. I'm the executive director at Level 2, and I'm just here to talk about the new PPP appropriations. I guess it's an amendment to the CARES Act that passed the Senate yesterday. Just a few things about that and next steps for our small business owner friends. So, for those of you who are listening, we do try to keep abreast on all the topics regarding small businesses, the PPP, the EIDL, and try to get resources out to small businesses at our on our level two co-working resource page and our Facebook page. And we also push out a newsletter that's been going on weekly now since everything's been updating so fast. Um, so with that in mind, I do want to go through some of the. I went through the text last night of the bill that passed the Senate floor, and it was about 25 pages, and it read as an amendment, as I said, to the CARES Act. And it will be the next step is it will go to the House for a vote on Thursday morning, and then if it gets passed by the House, it will then go to the president's desk to be signed into law. So, with that in mind, here are some brief facts about it. $484 billion is the full value of the bill. I'm sure everyone's seen that come across on the wire. $310 billion goes to the PPP, which is the Paycheck Protection Program, which is where all the money ran out. And the PPP, for those of you who don't know, is set at 2.5 times payroll from last year, average payroll from last year. Now, I'm going to get to how individual contractors, independent contractors, and self-employed individuals can calculate that based on guidance from the SBA last Tuesday, which was like 2 days before it actually ran out. So that's kind of ironic. So $310 billion goes to the PPP, Paycheck Protection Program. $30 billion will be earmarked for banks of under $10 billion in assets. So for those of you who are wondering, our community banks that have less than $10 billion in assets, I just looked up a few. State Bank, Liston, Home Bank, Stockyards Bank, and Citizens Bank all have less than $10 billion in assets. So they will get that $30 billion of earmark. Well, I mean, they might not get it. It'll be spread out throughout the whole country. But those are some of the smaller organizations. 10 to 50 billion will also get a $30 billion earmark of that 310 billion. And Old National and First Merchants Bank fit in that category. So, those will 60 billion of the 310 billion will be earmarked for smaller banks, smaller community banks. There's some wordage in there that's kind of weird. It talks about rural and communities, but that's basically how it breaks down. Also in the bill is 75 billion for hospitals, $25 billion for testing. 11 billion of that 25 billion is going to states for testing. And I know you guys might not care about testing or the money that goes to the rural hospitals. But in order for us to open back up again, we have to have some sort of testing program available so that people can be confident going back out. So testing is important, whether or not you believe it or not, it's fine. But for consumer psyche, testing is important. Okay, so that's that. And then another $10 billion is going to EIDL, economic impact disaster loan grants, and 50 billion is going to EIDL loans. So those are the EIDL programs, which are separate from the PPP. You can apply for both the PPP and the EIDL, but you cannot use the funds from the EIDL and the PPP for similar things. So PPP should be earmarked towards payroll, and then the EIDL can be for other overhead costs. The grant is forgivable, and it's up to $10,000. But I believe the SBA gave guidelines that it's just going to be $1,000 per employee. So if you're an independent contractor out there, you're just going to get $1,000 of the forgivable grant for the EIDL. Now, the EIDL, some people are saying that if you're approved for the loan, then the whole grant's not forgiven, but I have not seen that. So the grants, as of right now, seems to be forgiven. The EIDL program also has a 3.5% interest rate for small businesses. Now, that's all I've got for the what passed in the Senate. and it's going to the House. Now, the House might make some changes, as they often do, to the bill, but that is what passed the Senate, and that's just the dollar amounts. Oh, also, one other thing is the EIDL grants are now, and loans are also available to farmers. That's one change. Other than that, this whole thing that passed is just an additional appropriation. Just an additional appropriation to the PPP, to the CARES Act. There's no changes. So everything that you thought or I thought was wrong with the PPP program or the CARES Act or the EIDL has not been changed, except that farmers have access to it. So now let me get to, I've got a slide up here on my other monitor that talks about where the PPP money went. This is from the SBA. On this, just approvals, right? This is not the money that's been dispersed. This is approval. So if you got an actual SBA loan number, that means you've been approved and funds are earmarked from the first tranche to go to you. So for the first batch of loans, the average loan size was $206,000. Obviously, that's not an independent contractor, right? If you're just doing 2.5 times payroll or small employee. 74% of loans were for 150,000 and under. I know that's not the prevailing narrative out there, but 74% of the actual loans that were administered were for smaller amounts, under $150,000. Well, I'm not going to say smaller amounts, but under $150,000. So that's a big deal. Indiana got 35,490 loans, or 2.17% of the actual loans, and we were almost $7.5 billion, which is 2.19% of the overall amount. So that's what Indiana got awarded as far as its first. That was as of 4/16, with 342 billion of the 349 billion earmarked. So that's that. That's where some of the loans went. Now, for some things that were wrong with the PPP or EIDL that have not been fixed as of yet, and probably won't be fixed because we're trying to get this bill through, or they're trying to get this bill through as fast as possible. One, there's loopholes that allow restaurants to count each individual, and hotels to count each individual location as its own entity. So if that location has less than 500 employees, which I mean most all restaurants, probably all restaurants do, they're each considered their own entity, so they can qualify for their own SBA loan. That is why we saw Shake Shack get $10 million. That is why we saw Ruth's Chris get $20 million in the PPP loans. Now, how does Ruth Chris get it when there's only a $10 million max? Well, they have two separate holding companies that qualify for $10 million each. Now, Shake Shack actually saw the backlash and gave some of the money back. I had questions about that. Can you even do that? Or is this just a PR stunt? Well, turns out the SBA will take the money back from Shake Shack for the PPP loans. It's not necessarily going to go to small business. It's just going back into the till, and then it's going to be dispersed like all the other PPP funds. So that's what Shake Shack did. There are no contingencies in this new PPP appropriations that passed that says another company won't do that. Now, we're hoping that the backlash against these companies is so great that they will not do it, and then they'll open up. $10 million will go a long way for a lot of these smaller businesses. I mean, you can get a lot more small business loans approved for $10 million. Now, another thing that hasn't been talked about a lot, but is an issue, is the compensation for lending institutions. So the compensation for approving these loans, and banks have to be compensated. Like, I'm not going to say that banks should not be compensated, because they have to take on loans. They are guaranteed by the SBA if all the paperwork's in order and they do their due diligence, but banks have to be compensated. So I'm not going to fault the banks. I don't fault the banks. I know several of our local bankers here that have been working tirelessly to get these loans out and approved, up to 3 o'clock in the morning. So, I don't want to blame the bankers here. That's not my thing, because they've been working really hard trying to approve PPP loans. So the things that have not been, the bank's compensation, 5%. Banks are compensated 5% for loans up to $350,000, that's great, right? The next tier is 3%, so they're being compensated 3% for $350,000 to $2 million, and they're compensated 1% for greater than $2 million. So it is tiered. Trying to get the banks to approve more smaller loans, but 1% guarantee at $10 million is going to be better than 5% at $100,000. So those are some issues that were part of the first PPP. They're part of the first that we saw with the funding of the first tranche that have not been fixed. There's nothing that says that a certain amount is going to be earmarked towards small businesses. So there's not a whole lot of protections in this new bill, in this new appropriation that has passed. That was wrong with the first one. So I'm sorry about that, but hopefully there will be enough backlash from people that the larger corporations that don't need it. And another issue that we saw with the whole PPP program was just having uncertainty allows you to take the money out. So let's say you're only down 10 to 15% in your revenue, or maybe you're not down at all, but you're afraid that someone might get COVID and it'll shut down your operation for 8 weeks. Well, that would allow you to take the funds out because there's enough economic uncertainty to take the loan, which, even though you're not hurting now, you might be hurting later, and that would keep, some of the entrepreneurs, some of the solopreneurs, some of the independent contractors that haven't been able to get loan up until now. I would keep them from getting the money because of the economic uncertainty. So those are the issues that were wrong, that weren't fixed. So now, what can you do now? So here's the big part. What can you do now? So a lot of institutions have been telling you to apply to several different institutions for PPP loans to make sure you get approved for one. You can't do that. You're only allowed to apply for one PPP loan. You can apply for EIDL and PPP loans, but you can only apply for one PPP loan. So if you've applied to a bank, call the bank, make sure they still have your application on file, see how confident they are, and they're probably not going to answer this, but see how confident they are that your PPP loan will be processed based on this new tranche of funds. If they're not confident, then ask them to take away your loan and maybe go to a PayPal or Intuit or Square. I've heard several things. PayPal was not approved to be a PPP lender until the Friday before the funds ran out, but a few people applied and got their money within the next 48 hours on PayPal. So PayPal and Square and Intuit Capital or QuickBooks Capital have been, based on their technology, they are uniquely suited to help for quick turnarounds. So maybe look at PayPal. Maybe look at PayPal and Square. And if you haven't applied yet, and maybe put your applications there. Also, if you're afraid that your bank institutions have been taking a long time and might not get to you, maybe ask them to withdraw your PPP application and go to a different institution. So that's one thing you can do. The next thing you can do is, if you're self-employed, or independent contractor, guidance was issued on April 13th, which again was only 2 days prior to the SBA running out of money. But in order to calculate your amount, you don't have any employees, so you can't be 2.5 times your payroll. What it is first of all, you have to find your 2019 1040 Schedule C, your net profit amount, line 31. If you haven't filed your 2019 taxes, go ahead and file or fill out the form because that's needed to actually get the loan. Anyway, so you find out your 2019 net profit amount or self-employment income up to $100,000. If it's over $100,000, just make it $100,000. Calculate your average monthly profit. So you divide that amount by 12 and then multiply that by 2.5. So that's how you get how much you can have for a self-employed individual. I don't know why it took them so long to figure that out, but they delayed the process for a week for independent contractors and self-employed individuals. And now they came out with guidance. So it's basically your monthly net profit times 2.5 is what you would qualify for as if you're an independent contractor. You also do have to have your 2019 1040 Schedule C. So even if you haven't filed taxes, fill out that form and make sure you have that available for when you do apply for the PPP loan. Again, it's a 1% loan. If you use 75% of it to payroll and 25% of it for other qualifying costs, you will be eligible for forgiveness for the whole amount. So these are great programs. They are flawed based on the how they've been passed out, but it is a lifeline for small businesses that really need it. So If you have any questions for me, feel free to let me know. And I'll try to. I'm sharing this on like 3 pages, I think. So I'll try to look at the questions and see if I can answer any of them right now. Courtney sent me an email about other proposed appropriations. I haven't got to that. Sorry, Courtney. Let's see here. Nope, that's not going to do it. Okay. I don't think I have any questions. All right. Well, I guess that's it. You guys can always contact me later if you want, but that's the gist of it. Again, Thursday, this additional appropriation amendment to the CARES Act will be on the House floor for a vote. It did pass unanimously through the Senate yesterday afternoon, and then could be signed into law by the president. I think, okay, all right. Yep, I think that's it. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me at level 2. I will probably do a post with a lot of these resources on our website, and I'll throw it on Facebook as well. But hopefully this was informative for you. I'm sorry that some of the flaws did not get approved, but did not get changed. But additional funding is great. They were only looking at 250 billion when it first went to pass, so 310 billion is nice, and also they get the extra money for the EIDL grants and programs is nice. So with that, I'm gonna wait a couple more minutes for questions until the 20-minute mark, and then I'll sign out. So hopefully you guys are doing well. I'll look at my phone for any questions that you might